Okay, tonight we're working on the fourth lesson, Family Tree Basics. We're going to talk about the subject that scares most people, which is merging. If there's anything that scares people away from tree, it's the thought of having to do merges. So this is probably the most complex thing that we do in tree. So we'll try to demystify it a little bit tonight. And so this presentation is going to focus on tips showing you how to judge if two records are in fact duplicates. And we'll walk you through a few merges. You're not going to see a lot of the screens where you move the things over and and then you click OK and that sort of thing. We're going to talk more about the philosophy, the mechanics of what you need to think through as you prepare to decide if something needs to be merged or not, trying to give you feelings for what you really need to understand and comprehend as you go through this process. And there'll be several different examples of things. So as we go through, they're all different because no two merges are the same. And so you'll see different reasonings for why things are done, and you'll understand some of the background things that I've done when I worked on these merges to try to give you ideas of what to do. One thing to always remember, and I did not put this in the presentation, and that is if you make a mistake, you can always go back and you can go to the change log on the person who survived in the merge, click on the name of the person who was deleted, and undo the merge. And that'll put everybody back where they go. If you do it right away, there'll be no problems. You'll be able to have the sources go back to the right people, and all the people will migrate back to the people they were connected to. So there is a way to undo this. And I did not bring that up in the presentation. Okay, so first a little background on this. Why merges? Well, it's because there's multiple records out there for the same person. And our goal is to reduce them all down to one record. And to do that, we do merging. And when we do that, we'll take two people. And when we're finished with the merge, taking the information from the duplicate person that we need to save, we'll have a remaining person, and we'll have one record that was deleted. And that's kind of a bad term, but it's what the church used. So we're kind of stuck with it. They'll call it deleted. In fact, what there really is they just go hide the record. If you know the ID number, you can still find that record in tree, even though it's called deleted. But what happens then is it freaks people out when they find that their ancestor was deleted. What it really means 99.9% of the time was that that record got merged away, and it's now a different record. Okay, merging starts with duplicate records, and there's millions of them out there. Once upon a time when I was naive about 10 years ago, I thought, they're going to eventually run out of duplicates. Unfortunately, no. We have enough people that keep, bringing their whole tree in and then deciding they don't really want to have to take the time to merge them all. So they just say they're all new people when they really aren't. And so we have a brand new crop of duplicates virtually every day to have to deal with. If the church computers feel that there's enough similarity between two records in tree, they will call them possible duplicates. But that's really only the tip of the iceberg. What you've got to understand is there are many, many other duplicates out there represented by the question mark that are different enough that the computers won't recognize them as duplicates. And sometimes they're right there in the family. They could be two children in a family that are actually the same person, but there's enough difference between those two records that even though they're siblings in the tree, the system won't even catch the fact that there could possibly be duplicates. And so we have to keep our eyes open and watch for these. These are the records where oftentimes there's less information on them. And that was the reason they don't come up as duplicates, but they're out there. And there's a lot of those. Okay, the actual merging process generally starts if you haven't found one of those floating records by when you go to a person's page, you're going to see under research helps possible duplicate. So you click on that person and up comes the little screen that says review the merge or mark it not a match. Well, generally, unless maybe they were two totally different names, you would never want to click not a match at this point because you don't have enough information. So you're probably going to want to click review merge. And so when you do that, up will come a screen that will give you on the right side, the person that you were looking at. This is the record in your tree. And on the left side, with the kind of brownish heading, is the possible duplicate record that FamilySearch discovered. And you're going to be able to do a couple of things from the screen. First, you'll just compare and decide whether you think they're the same person or not. And if you think there's enough there to continue with a merge, you click on yes, continue. And from there, you will then be taken to a screen that looks like this, where you'll be able to move information from the left side to the right side if there's something on the left that's better than what's on the right and you think it needs to be, the one on the right needs to be changed. Ultimately, whatever's left on that record on the left side, when you finish the merge, that record becomes what's called deleted or hidden. And the surviving person then picks up all the fun stuff from that record that got deleted, all the sources, all the memories, and any information that you took out of that record and put into the surviving record. Okay, so when it's time to start thinking about, are these two records the same? There's 4 main things to consider: the names, the dates, the places, and the relationships. And they don't all have maybe the same value in this process of determining if these records are the same. I think probably the big ones are the names and the relationships more than anything. Now, the relationships especially really help to determine who the person is. So I want to talk a little bit about these 4 factors that we need to consider while we're looking at 2 records to determine if they need to be merged or not. So names, given names, really you're going to find all kinds of variations on people. You'll find everything from nicknames to initials to middle names being used for a first name to incorrect initials from censuses and all kinds of things like that. You're going to see variations. So don't get hung up on they have to match exactly. This is just part of the feature. Surnames, same kind of thing, especially if they are foreign names spelled unusually, you may find several variations. My German ancestors, first place Germans didn't even consider spelling very much. And so you're going to see all kinds of spellings for their names. But basing a merge strictly on names alone should never, ever be done. You've got to have some other factors in agreement, because just using names will get you into hot water if the only thing you're looking at is the names of the people involved in the merge. And we'll be seeing that. Okay, dates. Again, they might necessarily agree. A lot of times records, official records from countries and states and cities are incorrect. And sometimes the transcriptions that we're working from are in error, or people have been guessing and they don't tell you they're guessing. They just put a date in there thinking, well, maybe that's about when it was. Or maybe there's no dates at all to work from. So dates can be tricky, but they do need to be factored into the equation. And oftentimes I'm finding a lot of times the birth records are often more out of sync than death records. So if the person's death records, the two people's death records are pretty close or about the same, that's a pretty good indicator. The birth records, not so much. But just be aware that a lot of people put a lot of guesses in. And that leads to records looking like they really aren't the same person when they are. Okay, places. One of the things on that is to be aware that some people will use the modern name for the place. Other people will use the historic name. I have a lot of ancestors from Maine, current modern day Maine. The problem with that is prior to 1670, it was Massachusetts. And so, you know, if depending on who wrote down the information, you may see Maine, you may see Massachusetts. You know, you try to find multiple records for a person too to help you pin down where they really were from, because sometimes one record's wrong and the other record's right. So you need to be a little careful. And one of the big things I watch for is when I'm looking at merges is if you have a child and the child, let's say, was born and died in Massachusetts, or let's say the child was born and died in Ohio, and the parents were born and died in Connecticut. That just isn't going to happen. So that's a record where there's been a problem. And you're going to want to shy away from that one. And, you know, if they're trying to help you merge in on parents that are from a whole different part of the country than the kids, that makes no sense. That leaves us with relationships, which usually is one of the best guides as long as both of the people that we're trying to merge have family attached to them. A lot of times we don't have family attached, so that causes a problem. But try to look at the family as a whole, checking about the parents, the spouses, the children, and the siblings to see if there's some commonality here between the two families. And I mean, really be careful of those people where, you know, they have 30 kids and the kids are born in 6 different states or countries. Well, you know there's a problem already, and those kind of records you don't want to mess with. And I should say, you know, if you do have an issue and there's something that needs merging and you really don't feel comfortable doing it, you can always contact FamilySearch. And they have missionaries that are willing to work on these. I used to do that as one of my callings, and when we served a mission in Salt Lake. Okay, so just in review, when you're ready to merge 2 records, consider the names, the dates, and the places of the person and the family members. Especially review the relationships. Look at the relationships that are there. In addition, you might consider reason statements that have been given on the data or the prior merges, sources that have been attached to these 2 people, discussions on the records, you know, under discussions on the person page, or notes on the people, and especially alert notes. They've created these alert notes which can be attached to home pages on people for somebody who's a heavy-duty researcher on this person to leave warnings about what to do and not do as far as merging goes. And you could save a lot of heartache and headaches for people if you read those. If you're going to be doing a merge and one of the people has an alert note, please read it. Also check out the reef history. There may be important information down there. Okay, so here's a sample merge from my ancestry. I've got David Throwbridge and Lydia Holmes, and David has parents, which I'm not showing, and they have a list of about 16 children, and I honestly don't know if all 16 are really theirs or not. But I know that Lydia, the one showing there, is my ancestor. So I know that part's accurate. And so on his page, it shows David has 2 possible duplicates up there on the right-hand side. This is off of that research help section over in the right-hand column, top right-hand column of the page. And so when you click on them, they'll both look something like this. And so they look very similar to the David up here. David up here, 1709 to 1768, 1709, 1768. They look very similar. In fact, both of these two possible duplicates are just lone records. In other words, they're records floating around in tree. They have no spouse, they have no parents, they have no children, no siblings. They're just individual records floating around. And the dates and places are almost identical with the primary person, and that's why they're showing up as a possible duplicate. And so I looked at the change log on these people. That's another thing found in that right-hand column. And it showed that originally both of these duplicates were connected to the wife, Lydia Holmes, and to the parents of David. And they were separated from. So probably during a couple of merges, somebody was merging David Throwbridge's, probably merging Lydia's records. And there was this husband David, and she was already connected to the husband David. And so they didn't bring it over. And so since they didn't bring it over, that record got cut loose. And it's just floating around. And so this will be an easy one to do. All I need to do is just merge them together and everybody will be happy. It's a very simple thing. It's not going to be complex. There's no other people involved. It's just these two single records. Now, sometimes it'll look easy, but it's a little trickier. Here's a couple of my ancestors from Pennsylvania. John Abbott, who was born in England, came to Pennsylvania and married Alice Berwick, who had been born in Ireland and had also come to Pennsylvania. They married in Pennsylvania and they had children all born in Pennsylvania. Okay, and this is a fairly established family. We know that. And when we go into Alice's record, there's a possible duplicate for her. And that was interesting. And so we clicked on it to see what was there. And it's an Alice Berwick and a John Abbott. Now, John doesn't show any possible duplicates, and that's because this John Abbott doesn't have any information. It just says John Abbott. But Alice appears at first glance to be pretty much the Alice Berwick that's in my family. The birth dates are fairly close. The death dates are off, but the birth dates show the same thing. It has a child, Elizabeth, and they have a child, Elizabeth. And they're about 4 years apart. So it doesn't sound too bad. It sounds like it's a possible duplicate. The only trouble is, you see, the Elizabeth over in the family on the left was born in Pennsylvania. And this other Elizabeth on the right was born in Dorsetshire, England. And so there's probably a good chance that these are not the same families. And I'm looking at the family now to decide what to do about Alice. So if they aren't the same family, then that Alice Berwick's not my Alice Berwick. And I just want to know, what is there that will really tell me what's in this family on the right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the child Elizabeth and see what comes up on her record. So when I do that, it shows that she has one source. And that's what I want to see, is what's that source? That source happens to be a christening record for her. And that's where the dates that are in her record are found from. She was christened in November of 1746 in Dorset, England. Her parents were John Abbott and her mother was Alice. Not Alice Berwick, not an Alice born in 1702, just Alice. And that right there tells me that Alice is not Alice Berwick. She's going to be something else. First place, Alice Berwick's child, Elizabeth, was born in Pennsylvania. Alice didn't run across this ocean to England to have that baby. And so we're going to mark this merge as not a match. And we're probably going to do some other things too. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to change the mother's name to just Alice and remove her birth and death information. And I can do this partly because the record is a Green Temple record. There's been no temple work done on it. So I can make some changes to it, and it's not going to affect temple work that's been done. If temple work had been done, I don't know what I would do at that point. Probably call Salt Lake and say, hey guys, here, what would you do with this record? But I can go through and just drop all that Berwick stuff off of there and births and deaths, and that record will then go free and no longer be associated because I'm marking it as not a match. But I definitely don't want to leave the Alice Berwick stuff on there. And so I mark it not a match and go through and remove that information. And in my reason statement, I say, you know, this record comes from an infant christening of Elizabeth Abbott of Dorset, England, that names parents John Abbott and Elizabeth. Actually, it's Alice. I made a boo-boo. I can't change that now on this screen. I'll have to go into Tree and see what I can do there. The Elizabeth in this record was edited to look like Elizabeth Berwick of Pennsylvania. This is not a match. And that's the kind of thing I try to leave. And I try to get it with the right names, unfortunately. Okay, now to Esther Burrows, another family of mine. William Bidgood and Esther Burrows are a well-established family here in America. We have an actual marriage record that gives their names. We have christening records for the children, birth records of different kinds. And I believe they were Quakers, so these are Quaker records. And so there's a birth record for the daughter Anne down here that names her parents as William Bidgood and Esther, his wife. And from the marriage, we know that Esther's Esther Burrows. Well, of course, there's going to be possible duplicates. In this case, two. One an Esther Burrows and another one a Hannah. So we're going to have two to look at. So first we'll look at Esther Burrows, or Burrow in this case. And they look like they're pretty much the same person. Their dates are about the same, the location's the same. The death dates are identical, except one says February, one says April. I know where that's coming from. That's coming from Quaker records. So all we need to do is determine which one's got the correct date based on our modern calendar. And that'll be the date that we'll keep. But these two people are essentially the same person. The one on the left was created by FamilySearch back in 2012 when they converted their records from that new FamilySearch into Tree. And it was floating around for a while, and now it's popped up as a possible duplicate. Okay, so the next possible duplicate actually turns out to be a spouse of William. We've got William here, and he's in two different families. That's the same exact William because the IDs are the same. They're both in black because I'm on William's page. And so the person whose page you're on is turned black. So it kind of helps you to know that. And so Hannah is being listed as the mother of Anne. And Anne is the same exact record as the Anne that's over in the main family. And remember, I mentioned on the first slide on this family that Anne's christening record names her parents as William Bidgood and Esther, not Hannah. So I have an actual record to verify her birth. Okay, and so what are we going to do? Well, Hannah only has a name, so there's been no temple work done. There's no birth or death information. What I'm going to do is something you wouldn't normally do, which is change her name to Esther Burrows. And then I can merge her with Esther Burrows and everything will be fine. I don't really want to merge her in as Hannah because then people will come along behind that and they'll just see the name Hannah and will probably want to unmerge it. And then we'll be back to the headaches. And so, of course, in the information statement, I will go in there and explain what I did. That somebody put Hannah in there by error, And I changed the name back to Esther, which is the real mother's name, and merged them together so that we could clear up this confusion and avoid a second family for William, a family that he didn't have. Okay, now in this one, I want to bring up something. As we were working through it and doing the merge, William, of course, is in that record. He's attached to that record that was Hannah, that we've now called Esther. And he's, of course, over in the main family record. It's the same person. They're right across from each other. We're going to move them over. The basic rule that FamilySearch would like you to do is bring over all the people that belong on the right-hand side, even if they're already there. William's already there, but we're going to bring him over. Anne is already there, but we're going to bring her over. Why? Because if we don't, it can mess up the sealing ordinances for people. If they happen to be attached to the duplicate records that we have. Like if this Anne Bidgood record over here had the sealing for Anne to her parents and you don't bring her over, she's going to be a part of that family. But the ordinance that went with her won't get brought over if the name doesn't get brought over. And that's where we get these situations, and you'll see them at the very end where we have a name or we have an ordinance for a sealing and there's a date and a temple and there's nobody that they're sealed to. That's because somebody didn't bring these over in a merge. And that's how they get lost. So we need to do that. That's just one of those things you need to imprint in your brain and just remember that. You don't have to bring dates and places over if they aren't better. But if people are listed underneath this family section and they belong on the right side, even if they're already there, bring them over. Okay, and in this case, the one thing I did forget to mention, when I bring him over, it's going to wipe out the marriage records that are here. And that's just one of those unfortunate things with FamilySearch. It just does that, and they've never figured out how to fix it. So when I know I'm bringing over a husband and I can see marriage records on the right side and no marriage record on the left, I copy this down and then copy it back into their marriage information so they don't lose it. I could switch sides, but sometimes it won't let you switch them, so that I could bring over the William Bidgood that has all the marriage stuff. That generally results in having a real messy record when you look at the change log with all kinds of changes that didn't need to be done. It's a lot easier just to copy the date and place and put it in by hand. Okay, William Levering, yet another example. Okay, we got William Levering and Elizabeth Shoemaker. Notice there's nothing listed under parents. They're my 6th great grandparents. And I came to them because I went into Pazilla, and Pazilla said there was a possible duplicate in this family. At first glance, everything looked pretty good, except that I always knew the wife is Anna Catherine, and this has Elizabeth Catherine. Who knows? I had to do some looking to find out. I'm not an expert. But what happened to the parents? The parents are gone now. Okay, so that's an issue right there. And maybe the solution is here under this possible duplicate, because William does have a possible duplicate. And oftentimes your issues of where the missing stuff went is found over in those duplicates. So we'll go look at him. When we go to compare, they're pretty much alike. And what the FamilySearch did is they took the thing that was showing as a possible duplicate and moved it over to the right column and put the record that was in my tree over here as the possible duplicate. They do that when a record that was found as a possible duplicate, this one here, actually is much more complete, has more sources, has more family attached to it. They will put the one that's already kind of loaded over on the right-hand side and say, you want to do a merge, You're going to have to do it this way. So that's okay. They're just trying to make it actually a little easier. The only tricky thing here was that this 4 May is actually the correct birth date. So, or let's see, in 1679. It wasn't 1677. The church record says 1679. So I will have to bring that over. But everything else is pretty much about the same. Okay, so we're working on William, but when we get down a little bit further in this merge, we start seeing what's going on in the family. And of course, we know William was a merge. His wife and child, William, and this family are all Green Temple people. Remember, we said the Green Temple people are usually new records, and they don't have any temple work done on them, usually, unless they're the ones with the clock, which means somebody's reserved them and shared them with the temple. But we have this Elizabeth Shoemaker is a Green Temple person, and this William Levering, the child William, which is the son I go through, is also a Green Temple person. And so that's kind of interesting because the rest of the children, the other 4 children, are the same exact 4 children that are in what was the duplicate record that's now been put on the right-hand side. And their temple work was done 50 years ago. And so you'll also find out that the mother that was on this possible duplicate and that William Levering Sr. that I was merging in, they also have their temple work done 50 years ago. So for some reason, somebody pulled out the mother and the father, changed the mother's name to Elizabeth Catherine from Anna Catherine, and went through William. So they created a William and built the line through them, built William's family through them, and bypassed these people that had their temple work done for 50 years. And so I will need to go in and merge. And I believe I looked at the records for Anna and Elizabeth, and there's no sources that say Elizabeth Catherine. If they say anything, they'll say Anna. And so I merged her in with Anna and just said her real name's Anna. And then, of course, the 2 Williams, they're okay. The names are the same. The dates were pretty much the same. I just merged them together. And then they all that worked out. So I got those done, and I got the first child done. The next 4 children were the same children in both families. So when we merge the families together, they'll be there once. Then there was this extra marriage with no wife for William Levering and a child with the last name of Shoemaker. And I didn't know what to do with them at the time. I eventually investigated it, and Benjamin does have a wife and children, and nobody seems to know who his parents are. So I just removed him from the family, and that made that family disappear. And then here's our missing parents. So I say a lot of times you'll find the missing parents when you go in and merge people in. And so for William, I said, these are the same person. The birth dates were exactly 2 years apart, and 79 is the correct date. And you can see that I had brought over the 1679. And I have this in my reason statement, so I can click merge. And he's done. Then, of course, I have to do the same thing for Elizabeth, the same thing for the son, William. And I have to remove Benjamin from this family. So it goes away. Once he's out of there, there'll be no other marriage here. That will disappear. Once these women are merged, this family here will disappear. Well, after I remove William, after I merge William, because it will still be there for William until the merge for William is finished. Okay, now a year ago or two, they put in, because so many of us weren't putting any messages in for why we were doing this, they provided us with some canned messages, which is nice. They go everywhere from everything's the same to there's not much to work off of, but I think they're the same, and then everything in between. And you're welcome to click on them. Just be careful, because when you click and you're not looking up at the box above, you might think nothing happened. And if you click it more than once, you'll get a silly message like this that has the same thing more than one time. So be a little bit careful on your clickings, that you really only click one time if you're going to use it. Or you can just ignore the canned responses and put your own in there, or you can put the canned response in and add your information that you want to put in there too. But it's all being done to help you get better justification for what you're doing. Okay, when not to merge. This is when something that should be addressed. Every time you approach a merge, should I do it or not? And, in other words, does this situation fit or doesn't it fit the criteria for a merge? Remember, those relationships are vital, but they don't always tell the whole story. People with the same name can live in different parts of the world. Name variations may mean something, or they just might be a natural result of a natural variation of the name. Locations can be key. But you have to often look at all the different people in the family to get a good picture. And lastly, you're going to run into messed up records. Those are records that are part of the merge process that might already have 25 children and multiple wives, and we're not talking polygamy. And so in those cases, you probably best just to leave the records alone and let somebody else that knows a little more come along behind you and try to fix it, because it can get extremely complex when there's been bad merges done. Okay, so here's a good example. We've got Anna Maria, and she doesn't have any dates or places. She's married to Johannes Fischer, and she's got a possible duplicate of Maria Elizabeth Schmidt, who has a full name, and she's Maria Elizabeth, and the other girl's Anna Maria. They don't even have the same names. And so when you click on it to review, you can see that Anna Maria doesn't have any birth information. Maria Elizabeth is over in the Rhine and the Palatinate, and then comes to America. When we go looking at their families, we find that Maria Elizabeth Fischer was born in Bern, Germany, in the region of Bern, whereas the other wife, I can't remember now, Maria Elizabeth, no, the other one, she's from Hesse. She's a Hessian. And so they're from two different parts of Germany. One husband is Johannes Fischl, and the other one is Johannes Fischer. And that is significant. Those aren't the same names. Those aren't names that are interchangeable. And so these two women don't have the same first and middle name. They don't have the same spouse's name. They're from different parts of the country. They need to be marked as not a match. That's when you do not a match. Okay, so I said one married a Fischer, one married a Fischl, one's from Bern, one's from Hesse. And so Anna Maria and Maria Elizabeth are not going to be merged. Okay, the last one, we got Thomas Jackson and Hannah Johnson. These people from early New Hampshire. We're talking back in the 1600s to around 1700, early 1700s. There's not a lot of records from that time period. One thing that is nice, though, is John Jackson. We know who his parents are because his father names him in his will and gives him land. We know who Hannah is because her father gave her property in his will, naming her as Hannah Jackson, her married name. And so we have cross collaboration that she belongs with Thomas Jackson. And then Thomas Jackson got a will and names his children. So we have, for the time period, a fairly set family relationship. And when we go into tree, instead of seeing all this family, which was over in my old Roots Magic, this is all we find. Thomas Jackson married to Hannah Johnson and just one child, Hannah Jackson. Okay, these are all recently created records. They all need temple work. There's no parent showing. This parent column is empty. And there's 2 duplicates. So we need to go look at the duplicates. When you line them up, what you end up finding is there's 3 marriages of Thomas Jackson to Hannah Johnson. Hannah Johnson's the same Hannah Johnson in all 3 records. She's the one in dark black ink, so we're looking at it from her page. The 3 Thomas Jacksons are all different records in tree. They're duplicates. They all have essentially the same dates, a little variation, but essentially they're the same dates. And the first one only has 1 child. And the last one only has 1 child, and the one in the middle has the 9 children for the family. And actually, I think that's maybe 1 more than there should be. But that's for another day, a problem for another day. Okay, and the bottom one's the one that's in my tree with just the 1 child, Hannah. Okay, so what are we going to do? Well, we're going to do merging. Of course, you can only merge 2 at a time. And so what I did first is I took number 1, made it a primary record, and I merged, let's see, the marriage record is too early. So 1647 was too early. And so I can't remember, I didn't write what I merged it into. I merged it in number 2 into it, I believe. I merged number 2 into number 1. And that way I got the marriage date that's more likely, 1663 for the marriage. And then I merged number 3 in to the record that was left. And, oh, I see. I merged number 3 into number 1. And then I merged number 1 into number 2. And that left me with the correct marriage date and Thomas and Hannah together. Okay, I just played around and merged them in the order so that my last merge, I would merge into the record that's going to stay the correct marriage date. That's all I was worried about. Since all 3 records are so similar, it doesn't matter which one, I merge in first or which one I merge in last. As long as I come up with the marriage date that I want showing, I don't have to write it in. So when I get all done, I had Thomas with all these kids, and I'm going to have to check now and go back through records and verify that they're really all there. I guess he could have 11 children. They all appear to live to maturity, so that's interesting. I see a duplicate right here. I have 2 Josephs, 1671 to 1741. And so that's definitely a duplicate. And that'll reduce it by 1. And he has parents. So everything's in pretty good shape. Like I say, merging often brings in the parents. Okay, this last slide, orphaned ordinances. This is what happens when you don't bring the people in a merge over. And you say, well, they're already in the record that's going to end, going to be surviving. I don't need to bring that record over. If you don't, you end up with something like this, sealing to parents, done in 1920 in the temple, and there are no parents showing. Well, it shows us Chandler and Sarah Abbott most likely, because they've always been associated with this person as their parents. But a bad merge caused this. What you probably are going to need to do to fix it is write to Salt Lake and give them the ID number of the person we're looking at right now and explain to them there's a ceiling showing from June 23rd, 1920 in the Salt Lake Temple, and they can go look up that record and verify that Joseph Chandler and Sarah Abbott were the parents, and they will then connect that record to Joseph and Sarah, and then you will only see one sealing appearance, and it will have the 1920 date. But you could avoid that for people just by bringing over the names from the right to the left. Or from the left to the right, excuse me. And that will avoid that situation from coming up. Okay, questions. I know I have probably got your head swimming. I'll look at the chat real quick and see if there's anything here for me. And I don't see anything. My wife has been a busy beaver trying to get everybody's name. So we appreciate you putting your full names in your in the participants list. Let me stop sharing and turn off the recording.